this. All right.
I just approved recording, so that means that I'm now being videotaped for posterity,
You are being
and this will
videotaped.
go into the annals of the internet
That's
to be
right.
lost in the vast echo chamber that is the online world.
That is true. That is true. You have now signed away your soul.
Microsoft owns me. You're good.
Microsoft, Zoom,
Yeah.
whatever,
So Google. Yeah.
the entire technosphere. We are at
Good.
its liberty. Um, yeah, so okay, so we've never done this before, but we've talked about it a handful of times in recent
Once
weeks,
or twice. Yeah.
once or twice.
Mostly after all the conversations. I do like talking to you, especially when you get on. I don't know. We usually need a good starting point, and then it runs off over the horizon.
Yeah.
So since it's 2023, we'll do a starting point of what is coming down the pipe for Alyson Noune. Like what?
Well, let's first and just do, since again we've never done this, and if we do end up releasing it, either one or both of us on our respective.
This is not whiskey, by the way.
Yeah, right.
This cup looks bigger than I do. Looking.
It is bigger than your head.
I'm a merchant marine. I'm on a boat. I'm entitled to be good.
Yeah, well, I was just going to have you do a little bit of a formal introduction. So
Oh, okay.
yes,
Right
introduce
now,
introduce viewers to who you are.
I'm Justin Matthews. I do workshops. I've written a couple things. I've done self-publishing. And in the real world, I work as a merchant marine. That's what you're seeing in the background behind me. If I was to open up that window, you'd see Alameda and Oakland and San Francisco Bay. I'm actually on a boat right now. So I'm floating. I'm on the water. I'm not on land whatsoever. We're floating, although we're floating in the harbor, so you're not seeing too much movement. You know,
All right.
but I'm coming to you from work at the moment because
All
I'm
right.
plugging away because my 2023 hasn't really crystallized yet. But I have a bunch of really good ideas because synchronicities kind of tie me into a lot of stuff. But I do know it's going to require money, so I've jumped ship and I'm letting them pay me as long as they keep me around until they figure out that I don't really care. But I make every single impression that I do, and I have them all fooled. They believe me.
Yes.
They think I'm a valuable and highly productive employee.
Well, you know how to turn that on when it needs to be turned on.
Well, I
And
know how to get it
that's
done.
the games we play, right? When we're dancing between dimensions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know how to do it and make sure the place doesn't sink. So we stay above the water line. Everybody's happy. Okay.
That sounds like a very very good thing. Um,
Peanut agrees. Oh,
yeah, Peanut, of course, she always has to be on screen. She does this every time. So she's on my lap and we'll try to keep her away from the camera. Um, yeah, so we've I guess we should also do just a very brief history of your connection, our connection, which is kind of, I guess, I don't know if
ooh,
you
ooh,
call.
ooh. Can I tell the story?
Yeah, tell a story. Tell.
Well, I remember I just gotten back from Alaska. I'd done like a 6 or 7 month tour in Alaska, and I was trying to explain to your friend Christine Dormoy, and my friend as well, mutual friend now, about what Alaska was like. And I was like, it's hard to explain. We work like 15, 16-hour days, just 7 days a week, just grinding it out, but it's somehow rewarding. And I was trying to figure out how to explain it because it's really just a mindset, but it becomes your world because you have like 7 or 8 guys all doing this together, and you become like a team. And but it was much more of an energy, and it's much more of a dynamic. It becomes like your world, like you're moving this boulder uphill, like, and you're all doing it together, and it's impossible to describe for somebody that hasn't seen it. And you went walking by, and I only saw you from the back. This was at the farm, at Jessica's farm in Sarasota, and I only saw you from the back, but just your posture and your energy and your feeling and your vibe and the way you moved, and it was like moving with a purpose. So you were heading to the stand, to the where they sell the groceries. You're heading to the stand, and just from the back, I was like, that right there, that's Alaska. And Christina was like, Alyson. I was like, I don't know, whoever that is, but that is Alaska. Just that moving, that is Alaska right there. So that's when I knew. And then she told me later that you'd had a podcast, and so I looked at your podcast and I sent you a message. And I was like, hey, it's Alaska. What's going on? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's all
and
the rest of
and
it.
it's funny because I'm not like, I absolutely positively remember meeting you, and it's probably like 8 years ago, because we've now
Yeah.
been like I would say actual friends and connected in this time space dimension, in the present time for like 2 years.
That
It's
too.
it's
Yeah,
about
about
two
2 years.
years, and if not knocking on, it might even be knocking on three. So this was like 8 years ago, And I remember meeting you at the, I remember
Yeah,
it distinctly. So when you brought that up, I was like, holy shit, I do remember that. And it's funny because I think you know this, but the tagline of my little company of me is it's all about the energy. And so you
yeah,
just brought up what I think is the main reason we instantly connected on so many levels is because of that energy. And I think it's a very unique energy to be able to, well, obviously, we're more aligned and talk about and love dreaming about the spiritual realm of energy.
yeah,
But
yeah,
in that physical realm, especially because you and I are alike in the sense that we kind of have to fake it because
yeah,
it's not really what moves us. Like we can, but that Alaska is exactly what I would put in my world, my Iron Man experience. It's the
yeah,
same thing. And to
yeah,
be able to say that, it only people that know it would get it. Like Christine was
yeah.
probably like, yeah, okay, I kind of get it, but and it's not a judgment of her. It's just you get it when and only if you've ever worked in that sort of environment.
Yeah, just the high intensity and like you said, the teamwork, like you all have this impossible job and you embrace the suck and you make it happen. Like time and time again, rain, sleet or shine, 4 a.m. to 4 a.m. the next day, like the whole thing. And but like you were talking about though, that is the one thing that is missing is we don't never like wax philosophic about the spiritual at work. It's very much material, very much 3D. You probably a lot more misogyny in my line of work than you get in the Iron Man. I don't know. But, 'cause we're all just a bunch of dudes and we get dirty at the end
No,
of the day.
no,
Oh, no? No, no.
it's
So the
definitely
profanity I have to, like, readjust every time I come home, especially when I move in, like, the spiritual circle, because everything is going, like, Earth, Mother Gaia, and so I'll go into those circles, and I really have to, like, reamalgamate my brain pan and my thinking. Because what flies is totally normal and almost expected here absolutely it's gotten me in trouble as far as like campfires, and it's hard to explain, like you don't understand, like that was just like an off the cuff from my 3D persona. Like but anyway, that's fine. But the people that get me get it. They realize that I'm like recovering merchant mariner, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So you've been doing boat work for over a decade?
yeah, about 15 years.
15.
Yeah,
Okay.
because 15, well, because I always knew that I had to work seasonally ever since I was a child, because I realized even when I was a kid that like people's perceptions were sort of draw you to them. And I knew that like the time that I would get away from during the summer vacation at school, when I could really like embrace my spirituality and spend the most time in the woods and really get out there, that I would almost become, I felt like I was becoming like a sphere. But then for being around other people, like when I get back to school, it would sort of dent me in different ways and sort of pull me out of shape. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to actually do this spirituality thing, I need a way to be able to get away from period people from an extended period of time. And originally, I was going to be working seasonally as a bartender in tourist spots, and then I discovered the boat job. And the boat is equal time, so we work like either 2 weeks on, 2 weeks on, 1 month off, or Alaska, where I was working like 6 months on, 6 months off. So that's how I really fell into that. And I have a very logical mind, like I'm good at organizing, so doing stability. All the stuff that comes with being on a boat, like I'm very good at. Like my 3D mind's good at it, so they appreciate that. And yeah, we just keep it above water.
Yeah, and that's, I think a tremendous benefit. And I remember I didn't even have the ability to do what I did when I was a teacher for a short period of time with my sixth graders. I tried in so many ways because I hadn't yet had my full blown awakening, but I
Mhm.
was, I was well on my way, but I hadn't broken through what I would call that mainstream bubble. I still, it's like my sense was that there was something much much more, and that sense had been present ever since I was a kid, but I didn't really remember it yet, hence the awakening, until I left my teaching experience. But even still not being fully awake spiritually, I remember trying to be this example to these sixth graders and to put out there everything I wish at that point that I had been told at their age. And certainly I wasn't able to do the part that, like, knowing about the different options of work, because I think what you just hit on
Yeah.
and being able to understand that, you know is so key, to know that there were even options other than the standard 9 to 5, 50 weeks out of the 52 weeks a year in the office. The
Oh
fact that
yeah.
you knew that so young, I think had to have been at least a little bit of a benefit to you in terms of when you started to join the regular work world.
Yeah, I've never had a regular job. I've never been able to have the closest I got was grant writing. So we'd write the federal grants. So I'd have like spend a couple days in the office managing the paperwork and then time out in the field. And that was the closest I ever got to an office job. But I do, like I always say, like you can't teach what you don't know. And so all my parents knew was go to college, get a job.
Yeah.
My both of my parents, my dad worked for the city, my mom was a teacher, like you're talking about. And that was just it. You go to college and get a job. And I just knew it's like, no, 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 no. But yeah, you're right. Like you can't teach what you don't know. And there was no other option. Like, oh, hey, there's this entire world of entrepreneurship and the whole thing. And all of the rest I've kind of come up on my own. And with your Ripple, that's what really grabbed me as well. Because I remember the first time I was like in my 20s and I was standing on the deck of a fuel barge, and I realized how much money was sitting below my feet. And I was like, you know what? All of this money is going to the very top. If this was like a profit sharing corporation, everybody working here would be millionaires. We would all be millionaires if we were like a profit sharing corporation doing the exact same job, all working together, all people from different walks of life. And that's always the one thing I think the 3D does have a lot to teach us, not in the way that we expect, but just if you think about it, like the going idea is that the reason why things don't work is because people can't work together, right? But I was looking around when I was standing on the deck of that fuel barge, and I was looking around, and I realized like here's people from all different walks of life that we don't agree on a damn thing. We are not the same politically. We're not the same emotionally. We're not the same spiritually. We're not don't have the same maturity levels, same emotional maturity levels. But we all get together and we do one thing. We do a hard thing. And we do it well, and we make it happen. This job is what we all get together and do. And all this job really is making money for somebody else. Very few people at the top. Like of course, we're getting paid, but what's really happening here is we're making money for our investors, for the investment classes. Like, you know what? People can work together. We do it every single day. Everybody on this planet does it every single day. They get together with a bunch of people that they don't agree with about anything, and they get together to perform a complex series of tasks and functions, and they do it for other people. Like, why can't we do it for ourselves? And that's really when I started thinking, like, along the lines of like your Ripple 2020, where you know what, if we just had ownership of this mess, we can work together. We're doing it right now. There's no reason why we can't. If we had ownership of this mess and we shared in the profits, everybody would be a damn sight better off than we are right now. So that's
Yeah.
really why, after I started watching your videos, why I jumped onto the Ripple 2020, because I really enjoyed that idea. Like, no, there is a way. What she's saying is true. It's kind of novel, but honestly, if we were raised that way, because it makes perfect sense. Why shouldn't everybody share in the ownership? It makes total sense. And if we were raised that way, we would not accept the paradigm we have now. We'd be like, wait a minute, one guy owns everything, and I got to spend my life making sure he owns everything. But we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't if we had Ripple right now, and if we were raised in Ripple, we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't agree to it because we'd be like, that sounds stupid. I'm going to work with these guys and share in the benefit. That's really where I think that 2 years ago we really kind of connected there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess just because too, again, not knowing if we'll release this and on what platform and the timing of it, but my podcast is something that I'm vowing as part of 2023 to get back going again because it's been, I want to say, a year and a half, almost 2 years since I've done a recording, but I did it steady for almost a full year. And the name of the podcast was Best Damn Reality. And the sense of it, or the purpose or the intention behind that, was basically acknowledging that we get to make it up. We really, as you just alluded to, we don't have to agree to the way that we've been taught, but the key is having the awareness that there's another option. And like
Yeah.
that's what I get back to my own awareness and my own, what I refer to as my point of no return awakening. Why I call it that, because it all of a sudden, after seeking and experience after experience, I got to this popping point where I knew it was now clear that there was much, much, much more to reality than what we had ever been told. I now believed it, knew it to my core, never could really describe that to anybody else. But now I was making it my full time job to manifest that reality that I had already seen really since I was a kid, but it's so conditioned out of us. So part
Yeah.
of the long journey of doing that, because I'm now 10 plus years in, was finally one of the first physical things that made any sense to somebody was the launching of my podcast. And that was when it was probably 8 or so episodes into it when you were introduced to it by our mutual friend, and then
Yeah.
you reached out online, and it wasn't your name. You had a different name. So I remember, like, I didn't know I was talking to you until we had gone back and forth like about 4 messages.
I remember
And then
now.
I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah." And we still hadn't reconnected in person yet from the first time we met 8 years ago in person,
Yeah.
one brief time. And yeah, and the whole purpose of the podcast was not only to begin to give voice to these stories and these things within my own life, of trying to begin to let people know, guess what, we can start playing a different game, we can put these pieces together differently, it's up to us to make the choice to do so. And then a very big part of those first 12 episodes was the introduction of this huge project called Ripple 2020 that you referenced, that I don't know will ever get off the ground. But I know the pursuit and the continued speaking to it is going to take us where it's supposed to go. Because I've said
Yeah.
all along, I'm just serving as, attempting to serve as the best conduit for spirit, creation, the divine. I'm simply working to surrender my vessel and my personality to whatever that divine plan is. And I have
Yeah.
guesses as to what my role is. I feel like I know what part of my role is. And I definitely believe we can do it differently. And I have a lot of ideas to execute, but it takes a critical mass of energy in some form. And that's what I know is manifesting in my life in 2023, because it's happening right this very moment. So,
The the energy is definitely there. It honestly, I see it first. Well, first and foremost, it's a question of ownership because there's nothing we're doing right now that would ever change. It would just be the only thing that would change would be the ownership. You'd have like employee owned or owned by people instead of owned by investments. But one of the problems is that one thing we're not taught is how to handle power. We're not taught how to handle power and autonomy. It's sort of like it would take some changing the people. And I think that would be one of the things would have to change is a large percentage of the population, like 45%, I think, just really wants to do what they're told. Like they almost don't want that autonomy. So one of the things would have to change is we'd have to get like the other 55% that do. There's 10% that relish autonomy, that seek it out. 45% that are like on the front lines that are critical thinking. And then another 45% that really just want to be told what to do and want to toe the line. And that's okay. But one of the biggest problems is that we're not taught like how to handle power and how to handle our autonomy. We're taught how to follow orders really and do what we're told. And when you do have like the majority of actual like decisions being made by a small group of people, it's easier to have that continuance of that knowledge of how to like actually manage people and how to run things and how to handle power. Like that's what people are taught in those prep schools is really how to handle power and how to, schmooze. And we're not taught that. We're taught, that, you know, the Battle of Bunker Hill was fought in whatever.
that's,
Yeah.
one of my hypotheses, and again, this is just because it fits one of my backgrounds and characteristics, is I think you'll find that, yes, in prep schools, but I think you'll also find it in certain pockets like athletes, because I come from, especially if you played team sports, and if you're a quote unquote captain of a team, it is nothing but managing the energy, and you're managing the team energetically,
Mhm.
and I've had that experience, years and years, pretty much for the first 20 years of my life. I was an athlete and part of teams, and it feels as if whatever that training, specifically in those prep schools, because I certainly wasn't a prep school attendee, I feel
Yeah.
as if athletes are sort of the next and I would say probably similarly, anything that where you've got a group of people that come together and work together to produce a similar vision. So people that were in drama and did plays, musical bands, that jam. I mean,
Okay.
to
Yeah.
some degree, that same sort of collaboration, and it's got to be loose with the hierarchies, right? Because I think that the hierarchies are one of the most limiting aspects of our current paradigm. But I also believe, again, another hypothesis is that we actually don't need to jump to these bigger platforms of trying to execute the way that you and I can see it being executed. You, like in your boat world, me in what I refer to as my race or event world. I sort of feel like it's going to come about in much, much smaller ways to begin, right? With
Yeah.
one or two of us, and it almost doesn't even matter what it is. It's just when there's an opportunity to do it differently, right? Like to do whatever it is, to do some sort of coming together, some sort of sharing of opportunities or sharing of resources, doing it in a way where you're not needing the lawyers and all the paperwork, and where you can get back to handshakes and words and agreements with all. It's doing it in a different way, and
Yeah.
that's what I've spent 10 years imagining. And that's how, because I don't actually want to integrate in the 3D way of, I don't even want to find the legal ways. Not that I'm trying to do things illegally. I'm just trying to break free from the paradigm altogether, and
Okay.
recognizing that's not going to be something that's done overnight. But there are ways within the current paradigm that you can do things back with a word and a handshake and the trust. But that has to, in my opinion, probably start with pretty small numbers of people coming together, because shit does go wrong. Shit can and
Yeah.
will go wrong. So it's a matter, the other big word is trust, having that element of trust in one another. And I don't know about you, but I feel like in the past 2 or 3 decades, that's a tough element to come by. Even in places where you feel like you can and should, we joke about that word should, but should be able to trust people. It's a funny time that we're living in, where that is often not present, and yet where we're going, it's a key and essential piece, is having that trust. But I kind of see it as starting small, really small, with just one-offs, just little opportunities, and doing it differently, and then building momentum from little example after little example, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense because I remember for the longest time I was thinking like just way too big, like all these, like what would it take to actually have like real change, like, and all of these things required so many moving parts and pieces and so many people and the right kind of people, and I thought about it, and I think it was a result of a conversation I was having with you one time. Where it's like, you know what, I don't need to do everything. I just need to do something. And so that's what 2023 is really going to be for me, is actually just doing something, buying a piece of land, which I already purchased one in Florida, but I'm probably going to purchase another as well, putting it in a community land trust so that it's available for a business, but the stipulation will be only cooperatively owned businesses will be able to utilize this space, and then go about and just set up my own cooperatively owned business and just invite others to do their thing as well. And then have a profit sharing where a percentage of each of these profits go to purchasing more land and setting up another cooperative business. So we pay 10% back in almost as a tithe to establish, and they're like paying it forward more or less you know. And I feel like I could ask that of somebody because I'm pretty much donating a piece of land for free. After you put in a community land trust, I'll give up title to it. And that's actually what I'm doing right here. I'm on my second month on the boat, going into my third, and probably going to do a few more after that as well till I have the money to really jump in on this. But that is the plan for 2023, is to go ahead and buy more land, start a cooperatively run business, and invite others to do it as well, to use the land for whatever they see fit, as long as it's a profit sharing, cooperatively run business, and as long as we set aside a piece of land as a preserve, for nature and to pray into. Because the
Yeah.
spirituality is a big part of my practice as well. I'm part of the church forest movement. That's why I go hiking so much, is I always go into nature to do my praying. Mostly, almost mostly.
Yeah, I mean, that we should probably also highlight that as well. I mean, we've alluded to it, mentioned spirituality. And I certainly have found in the past 3 years that I don't know that I necessarily, it's challenging, because there's not a lot of other ways to sort of describe having that sort of particular connection with somebody. But in the past few years, for me, I've experienced a lot of people that label themselves as spiritual people and truthers and these things. And I wouldn't say that the interactions have been, um, let's just say that they've felt equal to or less than some of my mainstream regular world interactions. So I almost hesitate present day to like identify with that word spirituality, but what else can you say? I mean, that is what, which is basically to me what that means is resonating with, connecting to, working to align to, develop a relationship with that which is greater than us, and have that be a central guiding piece, the central guiding piece for my entire world. That's what spirituality means to me. And I'm very practical with it, meaning I have nothing against people that have more overt spiritual gifts and skills like channels and tarot card readers and others with those sorts of skills. But for me, I just feel incredibly connected to it. I don't really have those skills per se, but I'm all about living it. And
Yeah.
talking it is one thing, but I've spent my whole life kind of believing in this and seeing it. And then once I had that awakening, I was like, all right, game on. It's time to live this all the way and find others out there who are also interested in living this. And it is a very different world than the material, consumer based, materialistic world.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, you're right. And you're right. I should probably quantify the whole spirituality 'cause so much flies underneath that banner nowadays. But
Yeah.
personally, I always like to say, I think trying to define spirit is like using shadow puppets to count to blue. It's just not going to happen. Or it's like trying to count to infinity. You could start anywhere, go on for as long as you want, and still never get anywhere closer to the end. But we're almost like compelled to define things. It's how we're hardwired. We're not compelled to take those definitions seriously, but we are compelled to define everything that we see. So my definition would be I believe that humans are kind of like the priest cast of the earth, that the earth created organisms for bodies for souls to inhabit, and that we're also natural spiritual conductors like antenna, and we channel the energy from the emanations from the universe at large, from spirit into the earth. It's part of what we naturally do. So we naturally channel things into the earth, and we have experiences, and the experiences go back to source, and the energy goes into the earth, because the earth also has a consciousness and has a spirit, and it's not only physical but spiritual as well. And I think where we foul ourselves up is by getting attached to those energies we channel. And that's where the whole thing kind of goes wrong, is because we collect everything as mine and become attached to it. And then we run a risk when we do that as well. There is such a thing as like hell, if you want to put it that way. I've seen it where if you're too attached to the energy that you're channeling, when you leave your body, you go with it into the earth, and you don't get let go until you release it. It's like you can't go rejoin source until you release it. It's not like a perpetual place of suffering and angst, but if you're a miserable mofo and you decide to stay miserable post-mortem, like you go with that misery, that angst that you're channeling, it carries you with it into the earth, because the earth just absorbs it all. Earth takes all commerce when it comes to that energy. And until you're ready to release it and actually surrender to up, then you sort of stay there and hang out with it. And that was an experience I had as a child. And so I see it all more as like a giant consciousness improving mechanism, both the physical and the spiritual. And when I go into nature to pray, it's because that's the point. And when you do go into nature to pray, it's like all of nature prays with you, and it's really just a channeling from source. And you're right, I don't really put words to it. Even most of the time anymore, it's like my prayers just come out as like vowel sounds that I intone. It's strange. And but I've noticed when I do that, like the critters come out and play. Like deers will come out, like a lizard will come out, the birds will sit there. Like nature will, if you go out into nature and you do this, nature will absolutely pray with you. And you really suddenly feel like you understand your place in this world. And that's why I say like the cornerstone of any sort of cooperative business that I start, it won't be for the business aspect. It'll be to try to generate as much money to set aside as much land as preserve as possible. Because I don't care how green you are, you can drive a Prius with a bike rack. You could have a Prius on the back of your bike rack. You could, it's Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't care how green you are. Nature works best when we leave it alone. Nature work. We don't need to do anything. It doesn't need saving. It just needs to be left alone to do its thing. And nature works absolutely fine when we just leave it the F alone. So the more of it we can leave alone, the more we're saving and the more space we're keeping until we figure out this mess called life.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It was funny. I was driving to a short gig up to Clearwater Beach last week, at this time last week, actually. And I hadn't been at Clearwater, this part of Clearwater Beach, for quite a while. And it was amazing because there were all these new high rise hotels. And for some reason, despite living in the tourist, one of the arguably one of the top tourist places of our country, um, I never really put it together in quite the way that it came together last week when I realized nature is offering and affording, in this case, all of Florida, along the coast, to profit and to build these, enormous businesses, and to just profit in all these ways, whether you're talking about hotels, whether you're talking about restaurants, whether you're talking about, fill in the gap of whatever economic thing is profiting off of these beautiful beaches and off of nature. And you and I both know, like nature's taking a beating with that. Like, and nature's not asking for anything back in return. Like you said, like it's just kind of free and offering it all up. Yet it's just I don't know if I'm describing the realization or the connection that came to me. It was just more or less of something that's the main impetus for all of these successful rich places and affording this is meanwhile getting degraded and arguably destroyed, certainly out of balance, certainly in Florida. I mean, we're just such an
Yeah.
overdeveloped state. We're so overdeveloped, and especially the water, anything on the water. And it just sort of hit me. I'm like, God, look at this. Nature's just like, hey man, I'm just being pretty. I'm just being me. And and it's like being just taken advantage of to the nth degree. And we
Yeah.
as humanity, I really don't think, and I don't, me, I don't play the political game. I don't have any interest in politicizing anything. I think it's all being bamboozled. We're being bamboozled with all of it. So I'm not necessarily hopping on like everything's got to go green, because I think that's got propaganda involved in a lot of like I think there's a lot of nonsense
Oh,
and ill
absolutely. Well, the
nefarious
government.
efforts and people trying to push that. But let's not pretend that the earth doesn't need or couldn't benefit from being left alone more, if only not to be so taken advantage of in places like, let's just say, Florida.
Yeah. And just to touch on that for just one moment, like the Green New Deal, like I read through, it's the one thing we can always count on the government to do is expand regulatory control and increase spending. Like, and that's all it's going to end up doing. And it's not going to produce anything besides just more regulatory control and increase of spending, because that spending goes straight into somebody's pocket. That spending pays back the donors. It's all just hold on a second, let me turn the radio down a little bit. This is my We got an international shipment coming in on VHF. Anyway, I don't need to pay attention to that. But yeah, so I brushed up against the consciousness of the planet before when I was down in South America, and it's that's the thing. We're not hurting the Earth at all, but we are really messing up all of the other species. Like we are displacing we displace pretty much everything, and yeah, we really just have to leave it alone. And I'm not like trying to stump for some environmental cause here. What I mean is that you have to have if you have to have a connection to source in order to see it in some other way than egocentric. Like the people that are just building to see everything as terms of an ability to make money,
Yeah.
it's because they're disconnected. They're That's what they see. That's what they've been programmed to see. They don't see anything else when they look at something. And so really what I think one of the sign of the times that we have is that we sort of lost our soul, I kind of think. As a species, we've kind of lost our soul. Like even spirituality right now is like been rent reduced to a made in China dream catcher for sale in 7-Eleven. That's the most like we've commercialized everything to such an extent to where people can't see anything and not see it as commodity. Like,
Right.
it's not a commodity. It has an existence outside of you, but we're so egocentric in our current world, um, that it's hard to it's hard to see anything else. I don't know. I'm not putting it correctly. Maybe you can. I'm not saying it right.
No, I mean that sort of hits on what I alluded to earlier when I was speaking about my recent past couple of years experience of others out there claiming to be spiritual is just that. It's like it felt like to me was a commodity, was making my spirituality and this thing that I leaped into and dedicated my that is my soul. It's like I dedicated the rest of my life to this energy that is bigger than me, creation, divine, source, God, whatever one calls it. And when I started interacting with more folks, it was just such a knockdown in some way because it was so unexpected that it I would encounter people that were saying a lot of the same words and seemingly connecting on ideas and perceptions beyond the material consumer world. Yet when it would come down to it, you would find that it was really just another way to try to work to commercialize it, to profit off of our connections, take advantage of others who maybe are a little bit more disconnected, building hierarchies within it. And I'm like, wait a second, this is not the way I'm seeing spirituality. And I work to not judge others, but it was really hard. I had to work through a lot of feelings of one, realizing I had these expectations, I didn't realize I did. Two, then working through some feelings of, I guess it would be judgment, but it really just ultimately is about preference. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. There's many people playing these games out here in whatever ways that they want, but that's not what spirituality means to me. I mean, what it means to me more than anything is the connection and is stepping out of this commodity based, material based. You have to buy everything and find, and you can't talk about it, give it energy until you figure out how you're going to make money for it or pay for it. That's what I'm trying. I want that as far away from, as much of my life as possible. So I don't know that I did a better job of it, but it's definitely been, I mean, it's one of the reasons it's taken me 10 years to get somewhere that I really thought naively would take me a year. I mean, I genuinely
Yeah.
believed when I took my legitimate six figure in the physical world leap of faith that it was all going to come together in 1 year. And here I am 10 years later, and what I sensed would come together in one has taken 10, and in no small way because it's very hard to break from that conditioning, because even when you've got the connection of the remembrance or the understanding or the knowing that there is a lot more going on, it's a whole nother thing to figure out how to live that within a world collectively that is not that yet.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things there. Yeah, you're right. Well, you still wouldn't be there because I don't think there is any real there. It's
No,
just a
no,
collection of lessons that goes on forever. You can never be
absolutely,
done. You can never learn them all. You just
absolutely.
sort of have these experiences. And that was one of the things that really drew me when you're talking about, because I didn't know anything about your six-figure leap of faith before I started listening to the podcast. Then I realized I was like, oh my God, this woman is in it to win it. Like she's actually doing it. And learning these lessons, because we're never going to learn unless we do it, unless we know like there's no better teacher like reality. But you're right, it is, as far as when it comes to this 3D, I think it's like two different things going on at the same time. First, it's like reality is what's there when we stop thinking about it. Like that's reality. Like our perceptions, our descriptions of reality are not reality. Reality is what exists outside of our descriptions. And all of our current paradigm is really based on this almost masturbatory, overanalyzed description of who we are and what the world is, and
Right.
it's really just turtles all the way down. And it's this self congratulatory nonsense that we're just spoon fed from the time we're born. And it's really just, it's almost like a sickness, to be totally honest. It's like I always say, like, crazy is spending your life thinking about what other people are thinking when thinking about you. That is true effing madness right there. And the funniest thing is nobody's ever really thinking about you at all. They're trying to think about what you're thinking about them, or they're putting themselves in trying to imagine themselves doing or saying what you're doing and how they would feel, but they're not you doing what you're doing. So it's just this giant self-congratulatory hand job that either lets you feeling superior or offended or put upon, either superior or like or meh, gremlin, you know, and it's just a no-win game. And it's a game we play with ourselves. And so really that's what you're talking. And so it's best to just left alone. And reality swims in silence, man. Reality exists. Reality is what exists when we stop talking about it, I really think. So like I always see that as a benefit. 'Cause, like that means like reality is on our side. So when you're talking about the current paradigm, not to get too deep into the political, it's like when you look at it like on the macro level, it starts with the money. It starts with the money and a fiat currency. It's what we base all value on. So it's begins with need. It's issued in a form of debt, like all money exists as a loan. So we start with debt, and then that's the engine that drives the entire thing. It's a lacking in its debt, and then we have these people that look at a shoreline and just see how do I leverage that to produce money. What we can do, since we don't control the financial system, what we could do though is we could take ownership. We have to have ownership to change anything about it. We're not going to be able to change anything about the system from within it if we don't have ownership. So that's why I think that the land is important. It's a good starting point. And then your means of production with both your job and your work and your food is important. It all comes like having ownership will give us the breathing room to be able to start doing the things you're talking about, to like readjust to what reality truly is. Reality is not what you think somebody is thinking about you. Reality is there. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point, and this also sort of segues um, to like the question posed at the very beginning, sort of what's coming down the pipeline in 2023 for me. And we've spoken about this offline, but I think it's appropriate and fits perfectly here because I don't know if anything is going to manifest in terms of us coming together this year in the physical, like actually doing anything in the physical beyond the talking and the giving voice like we are, which is very important. But I
I'm
recently
not allowed in
shared,
Sarasota anymore.
huh?
I could come back to Sarasota.
No, 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 but I'm talking about like how you've alluded to, you already own a piece of land here in Florida, not in Sarasota, and how you're currently working to get another chunk of funds to likely intention to purchase another piece of land. And in
Yeah.
that time since we've been speaking, not only speaking about it, but since you've made this commitment right in the here and now, I'm doing this now, getting this chunk of money now, looking to get the land now.
Hmm.
Another interesting sort of, I call it synchronicity, right? Has crossed over where another, a woman from my life with certain similar visions. So you and I have big visions, and there's definitely crossover in our visions. And then this other woman that I've known for 7 years, also from our farm community that we alluded to earlier, the place where we first met physically 8 years ago. She's got also a vision that coincides and aligns with parts of yours and mine as well. And
Okay.
hers also involves land. And I also have on my radar screen, Sarasota is not my dream spot to live, but I miraculously, and I will say miraculously because it was, somehow ended up as the sole owner of this home. Now, of course, I don't really own it, the bank owns it, but the game that is home ownership, which is not one I ever really intended to play, but I would have been an idiot to say no when this opportunity fell upon my lap. And I believe and have known since moment one it was divinely guided because right now this could change next week as that fiat currency you referenced is set to collapse potentially at any time. So the value of that home game could change at any moment. But at the present, I'm sitting in a home that I could potentially sell for more than twice of what I owe on the mortgage.
Hmm.
That, Sarasota is quickly developing into a city that's even less my dream place. It's getting busier, they're developing more. So it's like possibly moving is on the radar screen. And if I moved, I too would have a chunk of money. So it's like I have no idea if, when, how. And like I said, I try to get out of the way and let divine guide it. But it's possible that we could have three people with a similar vision, all with potential little bits of funds that we could potentially get a piece of like we could potentially put some of this in motion as soon as this year. But even being open to talking about such things, and like I said, I'm jumping the gun a bit perhaps because you haven't even met this other person, but those sorts of things are lining up as real options. Now whether or not anything comes of that particular vein of synchronicity, because there's a half a dozen more, that's one that's sort of on my radar screen in terms of the many connections you and I have. When I met her, when we talked a little bit more about her vision and what she sees herself doing in the near future, I'm like, oh my God, no accident. This is so similar. So I throw it out there only as to kind of throw it out there to spirit, and give voice to it and put it out, see what spirit brings together with it, if anything.
Yeah, well, I honestly, my only take is the wear. That's what I have an RV that's at the mechanic right now. It should be ready by the time I get off the boat here. And that's my plan, is just to travel around intentional communities looking for the wear. Just some place to fit in and really just guided by spirit. So I'm putting pins in the map. And one of the businesses that I do want to start and then turn over will have to be in Florida. That's why I'm going to start in Florida, because it's going to be growing a certain kind of tree, and the tree can't freeze. The tree actually originated out of Brisbane, Australia, in their rainforest over in Australia. I've since located in the Hawaiian Islands, and I got permission from the state of the Florida Department of Agriculture to import it for business purposes. Um, it's called Hylindia docryli. It's called a blushwood plant, and its berries have been found. The seeds of the berries have actually been found to be able to they'll create an extract that really does well for curing tumors. And there's even right now, there's the you can go on eBay right now and find fake Hylindia docryli powder from some, you know, Chinese supplier that is just not true. But and that's selling right now like gangbusters over the internet. So I know if I had actual docryli grown in Florida on an organic farm and had pictures in a farm that people could visit, it absolutely would be a successful idea. So really, it's just a question of the people and the place, and just getting the funds for it right now. And then I do know it'll be successful when those other pieces line up. Yeah, and then just turning it over and making it a profit sharing business, a co-op, and then setting it free and watching it do its thing. As long as a percentage of that profit is donated to purchasing land to set aside as preserve, then I'm happy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what's was interesting when I visited this friend and sort of got an update of like, because I point blank asked her like, what right now, like in your dream scenario, if resources, if opportunity knocked on your door right now, what would you be ready, willing, able, like what's most activated in your sort of vision for? She's a PhD student at the University of Florida, and her focus is like on land architecture, but she basically fights for the species that are getting eliminated by humans fuckery. Like she's specifically the Florida panther. But she's very educated, knowledgeable, and battles the political nature of trying to protect all of the land in Florida that's disappearing for the existence of, ABC, and that down the line, the extinction and loss of habitat for a lot of these species. And what's interesting is she's got like some inside information like on this one dam that's apparently it's either going to come down naturally or be forced down because it's just horrific for the ecosystem, like in central northern Florida. And she said there's 20 springs currently that are being suffocated by the pressure of the water from this artificially placed dam. And so she's like battling the 3D world with this huge spiritual heart and intentions beyond the 3D world and has this inner knowledge of rich land here in the state of Florida. So again, that was one of the reasons why it was like, wait a second, Justin needs to be in Florida for his main thing. This woman is fighting for, familiar with, interested also in setting up medicinal, healing, praying, sacred places on the land. And it's like it just seems like something may or may not be lining up with that. And no worries if it doesn't. It's just one of many things that is potentially seems like could come to fruition even in the smallest of ways this year. So
That would be cool. I don't want to make it to sound like I'm definitely not into activism. It's just more I see it as our job and our place in the world. And I think part of the reason why we're so destructive is because we don't know our place. Like we don't have a good
yeah,
understanding of ourselves. Like if we had our shit together, we would not have a problem. Like how many energy patents are sequestered away in the Department of Defense as top secret? Like we really don't need to be running on these fuels. We don't need to be running on
right,
the hydroelectric power. Like I remember down in Clearwater, Florida, you could probably still find it on YouTube. There was a guy that came up with HHO gas. It was just removing HHO gas from water, salt water, and electrolysis.
right.
And was running a car on it as a test model. He went to Congress and demoed it and was never seen from again. So
Yep,
it's like, and that's just one story. Like
right,
there's hundreds of these kinds of stories that just get sucked up if they're not able to be purchased by private patent. They get sucked up in the Department of Defense and declared top secret, and they just go away. So really, the only technologies that we have are ones that can be controlled in the current paradigm. So if we were just more on our game,
yep,
we wouldn't need all these other measures. It's just it's humanity. We kind of need to have our soul back more or less, I think.
yeah,
And I think we find that in spirit, we find that in prayer, we find that in nature, we find that in silence. That's a big part of what I do. It's funny because you're talking about the I was looking into like the corporate structure because it has to have some kind of structure. I was looking into land trusts, as far as, and I was like, well, what do I call it? And I'm so used to putting a face on things. I'm so used to almost like not being myself, to sort of hiding this part of me. Like I'm talking to you as me. Like this is how I truly am, how I think. But I'm so used to almost like when I turn to the 3D, to the world, to like, okay, what do I have to look like to not seem crazy to these people? And I was like, but I was thinking about it, and it was the funniest thing. It just dawned on me. It was like because I want it to be tax free. I want to evade having to pay property taxes because the land's not going to be generating any income. It's going to be used for prayer. Damn, what do I call it? Then I thought about it. I was like, a church, idiot. You know what I mean? It's like I'm so used to putting a face on things that I didn't realize like this is the one instance where it will actually be just fine being what it is. So it is just going to be a church for us. So this is going to be a preserve set aside for prayer. That's what it is. And I found a type of philosophy called panentheism, not pantheism, but panentheism, that actually goes along with it. So I think when I do approach the IRS, it's going to be like, yeah, we're a panentheistic tradition. This is a land trust that we're setting aside, and we're not paying taxes. No, we're not a 501(c)(3). We don't file any corporate paperwork. We're a land trust organized around a church forest. Fuck you. Like,
well, you said
edit that part out in case somebody sees it in authority.
no, no,
Uh,
no, no, no.
uh,
What do but they do exist, right? I mean, there are
they
other
absolutely exist.
established church forests out there,
Yeah,
correct?
exactly. Yeah, and that's what I thought it was funny because I was so used to hiding, and that's one of the past couple of years, like reaching out to you and everything like that. I've spent most of my life like I'm the guy that's wandering alone in the. I'm that guy that people like keep out of the corner of their eye when they see me, like when I'm out in the park. I'm usually trying to stay far enough away from people to not be noticed. But like, yeah, I'm so used to hiding that it just comes naturally, I guess now. And I was like, no, I'll just call it a church. Like it doesn't have to be. I don't got to be like sneaky about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
there's nothing to see here.
yeah. Well,
It's funny though.
let me see her. So we've been going. I think we've been going about an hour.
Has
So
it really been an hour? Wow.
yeah, you know how that happens when we get going.
Yeah, actually.
So probably maybe for the recording, you and I can keep chatting for a bit, but maybe that a good ending point for the first recording.
Sure. I would just like to say that if anybody out there in Allison's world knows of a good community or of a good just anything to get in touch with, I'm leaving the forest. I'm joining society. I'm looking for communities, and the crazier the better. It'll be just fine. So I'll fit in just fine. I I'll my resume is that I am a person on a life path to completely channel spirit and fade out of reality energetically. So if you know a good place for that ties in, and I honestly believe I've actually done this before. So I have the memory of having done that before. So if you know any place where that actually will fit in, just let me know and shoot me a message through Allison.
I
And
would say
until
that
then,
I would say that I think we've all done it before. I don't think
I think
we'd be
so.
having the conversations and connecting in the way that we are. I feel like anyone that's sort of I feel like anybody that's connecting to the greater essence of what existence is somehow, some way has done this before. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know what, if we were, I don't know. Like I said, I know a little bit about all those things like Atlantis, and if we were part of Atlantis and disappeared, if we were part of the Mayans, if we were, who knows, all the seemingly great civilizations or some of the great civilizations that have existed in our linear past that have interestingly just poofed and gone away. Who knows what the real truth of that is? Because I certainly don't trust anything I was taught in school. So,
Do I have time for two more stories? Just real
of
quick.
course.
They're reoccurring dreams I had when I was a kid. Like I remember being in my pen. Like I remember learning to walk and all that. And I also remember these reoccurring dreams that I had when I was a child. And one was I wasn't human. I was standing on like I remember one of my favorite thing to do was to watch the planet rise. It was like Jupiter or Saturn or one of them. And it would take up the whole sky. And it was a series of dreams, whereas this other thing was just getting closer and closer. It was another planet. And we all were gathered outside. It was a series of dreams until finally we're all gathered out on this moon because these two planets are going to collide. And I know that it's going to be the end of us on this moon, but we were all totally accepting of it because we knew that like life was going to continue elsewhere. And that was the end of the dream, was watching these two planets collide. And I remember sitting there at the very end of the dream thinking that's how something so massive could have no sound. And then the dream's over. And I was like almost asleep in astronomy class years later. I was like 19. And then the woman was like, and this is why we think that like 10,000 years ago, Saturn and Jupiter collided. And I popped my head. I was like, I remember that. Like it was like out of nowhere. So yeah, I do think we've been around quite a long time. And another, the second recurring dream was there was humanity, but there were these like they looked like water towers, but they were sort of like orange and they had these convex, almost like crystal spheres on the outside of them. And what they were used for is they would take matter and turn it into energy and shoot it to different places where it would be received and then reconstructed as matter. This was the dream. And I'm like 5 years old when I'm having this dream. And my job is we didn't really have jobs. My purpose, what I did, my function that I served there was I stayed outside of my body and I would sort of monitor these energetical transmissions as they flew around, you know. And then I remember I was at one spot where I sensed wrongness because these men were sneaking into one and they had killed the operator and they had like an explosive device and I just sensed it as wrongness. And they put it on the transport thing and set it for just like a fraction of a second just before it exploded and sent it out to everything else. And I was like, ah, and the whole dream I like slowed down time. I compressed time as much as I could. And I'm chasing down this signal because I can neutralize the vibration of it because I'm trying to get it before it reaches the places where it'll be received and rematerialized as an explosion. And the end of the dream is when I finally like I haven't like it's finally made it to starting and these things start exploding and then that's the end of the dream as everything just starts blowing up all over the place.
I should also take this opportunity to let people know that you, I would say, are very have a lot of experience and wrote a book, and it's back in my bedroom because it's still I'm rereading it for a second time. Lucid dreaming on lucid dreaming. So dreaming and specifically, very high level dreaming. I don't know if that's the way to describe it, but active
I've
dreaming,
done
aware
I've,
of yourself within the dreaming.
yeah, I've had my first lucid dream when I was about 7 and I've turned it into like a practice. And it's basically just being aware that you're dreaming while you're asleep is it.
Yes.
And then what to do from there. Like first how to achieve that state and what to do from there.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That
how
might
to
be a,
become
oh, sorry. Continue there.
just how to become proficient because you can do anything in dreams. Yeah.
Well, and I was just going to say, there's a lot of chatter about, is our dream state really more reality than our awake state? Is the dream state, what exactly? I mean, there's all sorts of interpretations of dreams and conversations about what is being revealed to us in dreams, what is one of my favorite quotes from Picasso is everything you can imagine is real. And so we're in these dreams and we come back and you're able to give voice to them, especially you with your gift of the lucid dreaming. And it's like we're giving voice to, not saying it's imagination, but certainly I would imagine imagination is part of it. And it's like these are quote unquote real in some way, right? It's just we wouldn't be able to wrap our head, give voice to any of it if it wasn't in some sort of manner existing somewhere in the time in all of time space dimension. But that might be a good segue to like next time focus on talking about dreaming.
Well, I'll leave you with an answer that I came up to is what I have always assumed is what I've always liked to say is what passes for reality is usually repetition in disguise. Like the two dreams that I just told you, what made them seem real at the time, what made them important was the fact that I had them over and over and over and over again. So if you have the same dream, even though it's just a dream, and if you have it many, many, many times over and over and over again, it suddenly becomes more real. So now take the waking world. Really, what may, brings why do we consider this reality is the repetition of it, the continuity. You know,
Right,
when a dream has that same continuity, yeah, it becomes just as real. Why not? It's an
right,
experience,
right.
you know? So that's just something to think about, food to think about. Yeah, and yeah, we could do a good segue into another discussion because I have a lot to say about that, but later. I agree.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right, so for now I'm going to stop this. We'll continue to chat here, but I'm going to stop the recording right now, and that will be take one, episode one, chat one,
Happy
connection one.
2023. Yeah.
All right, let me
Yeah.
see here.